Hello, welcome to the Scrum. I'm James Carden. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Patrick Lawrence and Marshall Auerbach. In light of the events of the past week, the storming of the Capitol and the resulting backlash, we thought we'd take some time to discuss Marshall's latest offering on the Scrum titled Social Media's Reckoning. As someone who has long despised social media and the effects it's had on public discourse and the narcissism it encourages in people, I found Marshall's trenchant criticism of Silicon Valley refreshing and long overdue. So let's begin with Marshall. Why did you take this on? And now that you have, are you fearful that Jack, Mark Zuckerberg, and Sheryl Sandberg are going to place you on their large and ever-growing blacklist? Will you become an online outcast like the Red Scare podcast,
like Donald Trump
and Donald J. Trump?
Well, I'm not on Facebook or Instagram anyway, so neither Mark Zuckerberg nor Sheryl Sandberg have much leverage on me. Twitter maybe a little bit more, but no, I think what first triggered it. I mean, I've written other pieces on social media and think that they should come under some sort of government oversight. I know people say, "Oh my God, free marketplace of ideas. You can't have the government interfering with this. It's wonderful, et cetera, et cetera." And I said, look, we had thriving American culture, thriving Hollywood industry, film industry, and the like. And we've had and we used to have a thriving media sector. Newspapers and television broadcasters. When we did have regulatory oversight. So I'm sure we could survive this. Social media is a different issue because, as you hinted at, it does pollute the public spectrum at some point. And that's the thing I think is key. That, yes, they are private companies, and so they can set their own rules and have on whoever they want or don't want. Of course, as I pointed out in the piece, that didn't stop Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey from monetizing Donald Trump's content over the last 4 years. So that's there's a hypocrisy there, and like a lot of these Republican profiles encourage that are now castigating Donald Trump. These guys have finally found their collective spine when he's got less than a week to go in his presidency. So there was that, and I think the other thing that struck me was that when Twitter did deplatform Donald Trump, and that was followed by Facebook, you had this orgy of applause from the media and also from the Democratic Party, the very people who for years had been talking about the authoritarian nature of Donald Trump's practices, and here they were cheering Jack Dorsey and Mark Zuckerberg for acting in effect like a right-wing strongman would, cutting him off from Twitter. So that's the built-in contradiction. Now you could say he incited violence, and that the attack on the Capitol building was a dangerous event that did create profound damage to our democracy and to the integrity of the election process. It affected the transition, and that's fair. That's a fair debate to have. But I think that these are things ultimately where Jack Dorsey, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, God knows they have enough power. They shouldn't be judge, jury, and executioner. That's something that should be done by Congress. And I think Congress has been very delinquent in not following that up.
Yeah, I would say that even though our focus today is on social media, the behavior that you kind of just described isn't solely social media. We've seen that in the mainstream media as well. So when you're talking about how Twitter has been able to profit off of Trump, the same thing can be said for NBC, right? I mean, Trump became this larger than life figure because of his show on The Apprentice, and NBC profited very handsomely off of Donald Trump for over a decade, right?
Well, and also
became his greatest enemy.
And Jeff Zuckerberg from CNN, he let the cat out of the bag as well. When he was at CNN, he pointed out that Trump had been great for ratings, and Les Moonves at CBS made exactly the same point. And I remember the press correspondence dinner. I think it was 2017 when they were still doing these things, and Michelle Wolf was was hosting it, and she did her routine, and she called out the media on this, basically saying that you have this, grotesque symbiotic relationship with the guy. You hate him, but you basically love it because he's been great for your ratings. And of course, a lot of people, like one of the doyens of the Washington Press Corps, Andrea Mitchell, attacked her and said her speech was most inappropriate, which is the kind of thing that they say whenever you diverge from the the standard groupthink that's embodied in the U.S. mainstream media.
That's right. When you tell the truth, they were so
Yeah.
scarred. They were so scarred by Wolf's performance that they haven't had a comedian back. I think. So they're very snowflakey.
Yeah.
I want to
Can I tuck in? Can I tuck in here with a couple of points?
Yeah.
Well, one is historical. We're talking about censorship. It's we're looking at what we've got in front of us now is pretty naked censorship, right? I consider the argument private companies quite specious. Okay, these are the Pharisees of the discourse, right? They're private companies, but it misses the way broader point. The private-public relationship in our troubled republic is maybe unprecedented, right? Maybe it's got an echo in Mussolini's Italy or something, right? That's one point I wanted to make. And censorship, as bold as it is now, I think we need to realize that censorship is absolutely nothing new. When it is, it might be as old as the press in America, right? And I wonder if any nation ever functions without some form of control over the discourse, right? The first newspaper in America, the American Aurora, was the subject of Adams's Sedition Act in 1798, right? And let's look at what the Times and all the others have been doing. They have been serving as controllers of the narrative. Their very blurry relationships with political power are a matter of record. And so what we're talking about this week is rightfully shocking, but it's not new. I mean, the Times is telling you this on the front page of every paper, all the news that's fit to print. That can only mean one thing: what we determine to be fit. And that's what Zuckerberg and Jack Dorsey and all the rest are saying now. We are going to determine what's fit, right? Yeah. So, about those companies, a dozen years ago, I did some reporting in Hong Kong on Yahoo and Google while they were playing footsie with the authorities in China, right? They wanted that China market really badly, and they were tailoring their product accordingly, okay? And the question then, it occurred to me, the question that is unresolved here is, what are these companies? Are they media companies? In other words, publishers? Or are they tech companies? Are they means of delivery and no more? The equivalent of a long spool of copper wire, right? They just convey. That question was never resolved. My vote at the time, and I reported it, was these are tech companies and we must be very clear about this. Well, I believe that. They're tech companies, but they're behaving as publishers. I think this is the core of our
Well, I think it's more than they just they have gone from being tech companies to they have expanded their remit into media, and so I think they've gone beyond that. So I think there is an issue of structural separation that one would want to address, because and this goes back to, of course, the bigger monopoly questions that, we had during the time of big oil and John D. Rockefeller, for example. It was decided that, he can't own both the supply and the distribution networks. You're not going to have a proper functioning market system if that happens. But there are specific aspects that are unique, I think, as far as content and media goes, and that's another underlying tension that I tried to highlight in the piece. On the one hand, we like to talk about the marketplace of ideas, although, as you have pointed out, there's never really been a full marketplace, or at least the corporate concentration has circumscribed what that marketplace is, so that it's not really a true free market of ideas anymore.
It only looks like one, right?
Yeah, exactly. So there's that aspect, but on the other hand, you have what's known in economics as the network effects, and that which is to say that these entities naturally tend towards aggregation and concentration, because it becomes more efficient as a means of curating stuff if you can have it all on one platform. But the problem, of course, again, is that if you are going to have the network effects come into play, so that Twitter, Google, Amazon, etc., become the dominant platforms and therefore the most effective in terms of disseminating distribution, you can't also have them in the position of controlling the content, which is, I think, another issue that needs to be addressed by Congress, which they have refused to do. And the danger, of course, is that with the Democrats coming into power now, the Republicans, ironically, were more concerned about this, because their concern was that these guys are basically socially woke liberal Democrats, liberal neo-lib Democrats. So they're corporate Democrats, but socially very liberal. So they effectively reflect the prevailing ideology of the dominant strain in the Democratic Party. And I said, therefore, that you could have the social media becoming the 21st century equivalent of like the old Pravda newspaper in the Soviet Union. They largely reflect the views of the Soviet Communist Party equivalent today, and nothing else. And you don't really get a marketplace of ideas.
Well, for a long time I thought these comparisons between the Times or the Post and Pravda were a bit overdone, but I'm not sure they are anymore.
Yeah, and I don't want it to be taken literally, but to the extent that you do circumscribe a range of opinion until it matches a prevailing ideology, it is very similar. And so, yeah, I think Reagan's joke about the Post being the Pravda on the Potomac, he might have just been ahead of his time at that point. So.
Well, we've also seen sort of, I think you guys are alluding to kind of a double standard that we've seen at play, right? So before the election, we saw Twitter's suppression of the New York Post's reporting on Hunter Biden and his business dealings. And that was branded as disinformation, and the Post wasn't able to retweet out the story, right?
Yeah, that was really a key moment, I think.
That was a key moment. But it seems strange that they're not okay with that, but they're totally okay with someone like, I don't know, Jonathan Chait over at New York Magazine, who's able to publish a story entitled, "What if Trump had been a Russian asset since 1987?" Right? So that sort of ludicrous conspiracy theory found no objection online, right? And people like Chait are able to, tweet the stuff out. They're invited on Chris Hayes and to talk about it and all that stuff. So there seems to be a double standard, which seems objectionable.
And Twitter's new, Patrick pointed this out to me, but Twitter's new policy, its new policy framework, specifically gives ground to expel you from the platform if you issue commentary, this roughly, which undermines the outcome of a particular election. So clearly they have, Donald Trump questioning the results of the November election in mind. But in my piece, I suggested that, while in many respects, we had the same thing after 2016, and people immediately within hours of the election were saying, this wasn't a fair election. It was, basically politically engineered by Putin. He's responsible for the election. He's not a legitimate president. Trump is not a legitimate president. Yeah. So do people like Max Boot or Jonathan Chait get deplatformed for expressing those views. Now, obviously, I think we know the answer to that, because they would have to deplatform the entire Democratic Party over the last 4 years, and indeed Robert Mueller. But that's clearly not the case. But that's the kind of slippery slope that you get when you start to go down.
Marshall, I want to ask you, forgive me, James, slippery slope. Where do you think we are on this slippery slope? With this latest wave of things, this matter of censorship this week became something more than an intellectual abstraction to me, right? I started really wondering. To be honest, I started wondering about places like Mexico, right? How scary do you think this is? Either of you, I'd love your opinions.
Look, I'm worried about it, and as I said, ironically, I think the censorship is likely to become more of a problem under a Biden administration, because the irony was that of course the Republicans, it was very self-interested. They basically self-serving. They wanted to have more of the kind of crap that's being disseminated by Fox. They wanted to have a marketplace idea. Of course, what they really wanted was to get their own ideas out there, however insidious they might be. So, I wouldn't suggest their motives were purely liberal democratic in the classic sense of the word. But whatever the motives, it was a legitimate concern, and I think, as you pointed out, it's more of a concern now at this juncture.
I think the differences now are the baldness of it, the nakedness of it, and also the enormous, what's my word? The enormous growth in the presence of independent media that are outside the control of the master narrative keepers, right?
But they are going after them. I mean, that was something that Glenn Greenwald pointed out in a recent piece as well, the way that Amazon and Apple and Google were able to deplatform Parler, which was an alternative.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
And they the argument was, well, if you don't like this site, then you can go to someone else, and if you have a genuinely free marketplace of ideas, a group like Parler ought to be able to express its views freely. But of course, the concentration, the dominance of Google with its App Store and Apple with its App Store, they basically took Parler off the lists, and within literally days they had shut them down completely. And they could say, well, they were disseminating hate speech, but it also happens, as Greenwald pointed out, they were the fastest selling app in the stores, and they were becoming a serious competitor to these guys. So you have to question what their motives were. And again, it points to the dangers of having these guys being, as I pointed out before, judge, jury, and executioner.
Well, the ramifications of this go beyond social media. I recently read that, for instance, New York State has approved a plan to allow insurance companies to base premiums on what they find on your social media, right? So, and then we have the instance of Airbnb for next week. They've canceled everyone's reservations in Washington, D.C., right? So, at what point do we, you both are Asianists. I recently was reading about China's social credit system. Are we on the path to something like that, where if you misbehave online, you're going to have, your access to credit compromised, your access to, you won't be able to use Uber, you won't be able to make an Airbnb reservation?
You'll turn off your phone.
James, you go right to it. The scariest part about this, and I am beginning to find it rather scary, is where's the limit? We just don't know where the limit is, right? Delta Airlines, just some Trump supporters were shouting at Mitt Romney and Phil Graham at some airport terminal or something because
Lindsey
they
Graham, yeah.
betrayed Trump.
Yeah.
And I think it was Delta announced we are not going to we are going to blacklist those people. They will not be permitted to fly on our airline. I mean, where's the bottom here?
Yeah.
Right.
They're now on the no-fly list along with Al Qaeda terrorists. So it's literally it's the same list. So yeah, where does it stop? That's the problem. And of course, the beauty of it here is that from the government's perspective, is that the dirty work's being done by these companies. So you could say, well, we're not being authoritarian. We're not like those Chinese, where it's all being done by the Communist Party.
Exactly.
And that is the organ of government. They're basically saying it's Google that's doing it, or it's Apple that's doing it. So there is every incentive in the world for the current the status quo to continue. I mean, even when the Democrats, people say, well, they're the ones that have always talked about regulating big tech before, but the focus has generally been, well, we ought to just break them up. They're too big and too powerful. But just I think James Galbraith has pointed this out. If you just go create 8 Facebooks, for example, why is that better than having just the one dreadful one we have today? I mean, it doesn't really solve the problem.
It's a flinch. It's a complete flinch.
Yeah.
Listen, can I ask you, Marshall, to sort out this question of Article 230 or whatever it's called? I can't quite make out. I get all tangled up. What's on the table there, and what's under threat or whatever. My own opinion is these companies must not be held liable because that awards them a responsibility and authority they shouldn't have.
Well, it would certainly act as a deterrent. So broadly speaking, it's from the Communications Act, Section 230, and it provides legal immunity for these guys, so that if someone effectively yells fire in a crowded theater on a social media platform, they cannot be held liable. I mean, if I say
they should have that immunity, in my view.
Yeah, that's right. So so that's the argument to give them the immunity, and the argument is that you wouldn't have had this tremendous growth in social media and in these platforms without that immunity, because they would have been sued to the ground otherwise. But a lot of people are saying that's the problem right now, that you can pretty well say whatever you like. The reason why, now last year, before he self-destructed politically, Josh Hawley did try to introduce legislation to repeal that immunity. Now, as you said, if they were just platforms, if they were just copper wires or whatever, I would say they shouldn't be held liable. But now that they are, they're content providers as well as disseminators. So I think that does raise separate issues. The problem, of course, is that you might actually find that the repeal, the concern is that if you have no regulation of the content, if you don't hold them liable, that anything goes. I mean, that they can just that any kind of hate speech goes.
I propose a sort of Glass-Steagall for social media.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent idea.
Yahoo News and that guy, that Michael Isikoff, out. No, you're a conveyor. Get out of the news business, right?
Isikoff is in the news business. That's news. What about, and this has to be it, I'm afraid, because we seem to be running out of time, but I want to get your opinion about the idea of turning these tech companies into utilities.
Well, that's effectively what you would do.
Con Ed, AT&T, that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah, that's basically my view. That's my view. Ironically, that was also the suggestion of Steve Bannon. He made that suggestion about 4 years ago, showing that the old stop clock can be right twice a day. But Bannon made the same point, that you don't, size is not the consideration. You want to make these size neutral, regulated like a utility is done. And as you say, get out of the content business. So make the structural separation. Do a Glass-Steagall equivalent for social media. I think that's actually a very, very good way to go.
Well, now that Marshall has mentioned Steve Bannon, we won't be able to tweet this out, but anyway, this was a really good discussion, and I think that unfortunately our time is almost up, so we'll wrap it up. Thanks, guys.
Yes,
it could be our
great to
last
join
one
you again.
if the way things are going, but if so, it was a good one to go out on.
Yeah, at least we're still able to have this conversation.
Yeah,
Don't forget.
exactly.
And if we're not banned by then, we're planning to do one the afternoon of Inauguration Day. So we hope
I'm
that
very excited to do it. Yeah.
you'll join us for the inauguration of Joseph Robinette Biden and Kamala Harris.
Is that his middle name? Wow.
All right. So I'll see you guys.
Nobody's perfect.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks.
Cheers.